Okay, there we are. Here we are. All right. Sorry I'm a little late here. Had to restart the computer in the classroom. How's everybody doing? Did you all manage okay? Stay warm?
Yeah, pretty much.
Good. Good. I wouldn't come out and drive around unless you have to this morning. The roads are not very nice, but it's meant to be warming up quite a lot. And hopefully that will melt everything down a little bit. Okay, so, there's Tafari. All right, so we're going to look at a little bit of the information from chapter 3. Does anybody have any questions before we look at this? Anything on assignments or on the syllabus? Well, we don't want to do this with the voiceover. How do we turn off the voiceover? Oh, okay, it should be okay. Alright. Let's see if the PowerPoint slides have decided to work again in the Collaborate space. Okay, so hopefully you enjoyed your long weekend, caught up with some sleep, and did it change?
No.
That's really boring. Okay, back to the... I don't understand what has started happening there. So now it's showing the... Okay. That is so bizarre. I was hoping with the power cut and the computer going off and rebooting that it would all fix itself, but I guess not. Okay. So we're going to look just a little bit at some of the information here to do with stress. It's a big problem, I think, especially during this time of the pandemic. I think a lot of people are feeling a lot of stress, parents who have lost their jobs or families who are stuck at home with a large number of you in a not very big space. So I think even more than normal, the idea of understanding stress and how we can manage it and its impact on our physiology and our mental health is quite important. But it won't go away when the pandemic is over. It partly depends upon your personality, and it partly depends upon the environment that you're in. So, sometimes you end up in a job that is very stressful, and they put a lot of pressure on you, or there may be other things going on in your life, and the pile-up of issues becomes a large stressor. So the term stress is defined as the actual reaction that we have in our body that can be psychological or physical or both. And typically it's in demand, or we consider it as being in demand to a threatening situation. It isn't always. Exercise is considered to cause stress in the body. It skews the homeostasis of the body. But up to a point, exercise is considered a positive stressor. So the exercise, when you look at the definitions of distress and eustress, exercise would typically be considered eustress, right? So it results in positive outcomes, we see positive health outcomes, and we improve physiological functioning. But if we do too much of it, then it can become a negative impact on the body. Distress, so stressor, distress is negative, right? It's producing unwanted outcomes. They may be difficult to control, all right? And again, stress is an interesting phenomenon because it's very much personal, okay? It's my perception of the situation that defines whether or not it's a stressor or whether it's a eustress or a distress, okay? So for example, some people might find the idea of jumping out of a plane with a parachute really exciting and like it's on their bucket list and they can't wait to do it, and then when they get to the door of the plane, they're just like waiting for the countdown so they can get out of the plane and get that feeling that they've always thought about. For other people, that would be hugely distressful, right? That the perception of danger possibly would make that a very negative situation rather than a positive situation, all right? So how I feel the stress, how I perceive the stressor is important. And so that's something I think we have to really bear in mind. Again, we mentioned this, I think, last week, that we can't assume someone else's response to something, right? That we have to make sure that we ask them if they're okay or if they're not okay, you know, because their perception of a situation isn't going to be the same as yours, all right? We often have to manage extreme emotions when we're stressed. We might have troubling thoughts that we talked about in chapter 2 with the psychological health. Are those troubling thoughts acute and they pass, or do they build up and become a chronic situation and become something that could be clinically depression or anxiety disorder, right? So what's interesting here is it doesn't matter whether it's a positive or a negative. The body's physiological reaction to stress is the same, all right? And that's important to understand because you may be going through something that's very pleasurable, but that's still causing some physiological responses in your body that you need to manage a little bit, all right? So it can be damaging if we don't manage these responses, okay? So the physical responses that we see, we get when your brain perceives stress, good or bad, right? Then the first thing it's going to do is release some stress hormones, and it's going to turn on the sympathetic nervous system, the fight or flight nervous system. And so those hormones plus the sympathetic nervous system increase heart rate, they increase blood pressure, the blood flow to the heart and the skeletal muscles increases, so we see dilation of the arteries out to the skeletal muscle, and that can all be very useful, obviously, because I need more blood flow to my muscles if I'm going to have to fight or if I'm going to run away. But if it's a chronic event, right, because the stress that I'm perceiving and I'm feeling isn't just a short exercise session, it's my life or my job or my home situation, right? Then these physiological responses are ongoing, and then they become very negative for an individual, right? Hans Selye came up with the idea of the general adaptation syndrome, GAS, and it has 3 levels. So level 1 is alarm. So if I think about a stressor or I see something that stresses me, then the brain sends this alarm signal to turn on stress hormones and turn on the sympathetic system. All right? So that's, as we said, that's good in the short term. Then we go to resistance. And resistance is the level where the stressor is persisting, but I'm able to deal with that response. I have a protective scenario going on, right? So it's, it might be threatening, but I'm able to run away, okay? Or I'm able to stand up for myself if it's an immediate scenario at work, for example. If someone's trying to bully me, can I stand up for myself? Okay. If it goes on, then we get to what Selye called an exhaustion phase. And the exhaustion phase is the point where your body cannot manage to just keep going with all these stress hormones and the high heart rate and the high blood pressure, and your immune system becomes weakened. And at this stage, you're much more susceptible to infections. Like right now, if you're very, very stressed, that would be not a good scenario to go into a situation where you could meet someone who was COVID positive, right? And so prolonged exposure to stress ends up weakening our immune system and our response to viruses and things, right? I think that's important to point out because a lot of you are athletes or you are individuals who like to be physically active. This might be why you took the class, right? So it's important to understand that exercise is a stress and we can do too much of it. And if we do too much of it, in exercise terms, we would call it overtraining, all right? In Selye's terms, we would say that we reached exhaustion phase, all right? And so over-exercising, not giving yourself at least one rest day every week, all right? Maybe training twice a day without enough rest, things like that. Then that can lead you to a point where you're actually more susceptible to get sick when you might be thinking that you're doing everything you can to stay healthy, right? So you have to watch the barometer. Like, am I feeling overly tired? Like maybe I've been doing too much running and it's time to take a day off. All right? So we said that there were physiological and psychological responses. So psychologically, you may be feeling fine physically. Does not mean that you're not responding to the stress. It could be psychological instead. So you may be getting very frustrated with something. Or typically, I find that I get very overwhelmed and I start to feel very anxious and I get this kind of fluttery feelings around my chest, right? Often when we're very stressed, it's difficult to sleep, right? So, and then that has its own packet of problems if we're not sleeping enough, right? So we sometimes will term this as burnout, right? So the psychological responses aren't as easy to observe from the outside, right? It's much easier for us to hide those than it is to hide the physiological responses. Post-traumatic stress disorder is a psychological response to stress. Depression is often linked directly to a stressful life event, right? So burnout is like overtraining or exhaustion, but from a psychological point of view. It's the point where we've just had enough, really. I can't manage this anymore, right? I'm totally exhausted. There's nothing more I can do. I don't care about work anymore. I don't care about other people's worries and concerns. I just don't care, right? That would be a typical response to burnout. Now, sometimes burnout can occur because we've set ourselves up to think that we're going to achieve something that was not very realistic, right? And we try and we try and we try and we try, and that can result in burnout. Okay, so we have to be careful with our mental health, with our psychological health, as well as with this overtraining or exhaustion phase that sets us up to weakens our immune system and makes us more susceptible to illnesses. Right? So, do I have that here? Ooh, I'm gonna. Sorry, I'm just trying to recall. Let me do this. So, again, this is very individual, right? It's very difficult for one person to say, well, I don't understand what you're stressed about because this isn't a problem, right? And so we have to be aware of the fact that individual responses are very important here. And we're going to do a graph here. Right, so my inverted U graph is here's stress. Ruling. So this is stress level. And this is, it could be immune functioning, but I'm just going to put functioning here. Okay. So what we see with stress is an interesting response that looks a bit like this. All right? So very low levels of stress are typically not good for humans because at this level we're bored, we're uninterested, we're not motivated in anything, right? And at very high levels of stress, this is also not good because we are shutting down, we're experiencing burnout, we're experiencing exhaustion, right? We're not paying attention to things that are important, right?
And so what we function best at is this moderate level. All right? And then here, under moderate levels of stress, we function optimally, right? So there's got to be enough stress going on to stimulate us and keep us interested, but not so much to push us over the top, okay? When we do exercise physiology, this idea comes back with regards to physical activity and exercise. People who are very low active or sedentary tend to have poor immune function, so they're much more likely to get sick. People who do a lot of very high intense exercise tend to have low immune function and get sick quite a lot. What we want to establish and what we want to encourage are moderate levels of physical activity and exercise that then stimulate our immune function and make us more healthy and less likely to get ill. All right? Any questions? So low to moderate levels of stress can enhance performance, not really low, but low to moderate. That increases my effort, it increases my attention. I feel like I've got lots of space in my brain to manage this work, all right? Think about what happens when you feel really stressed and your brain shuts down, right? So I used to have the most dreadful time with exams when I was younger. And I would often go into the exam, and it wasn't that I hadn't studied. I would go into the exam and I couldn't answer anything on the paper because my mind was just went blank, right? That's because of too much stress. I put myself under too much stress for the result of that exam, all right? And cortisol is a stress hormone that attaches to receptors in the hippocampus in the middle of your brain, and the hippocampus is responsible for pulling out those memories. So if I have a lot of cortisol attached to my hippocampus, it can't do the job and my memory goes blah, right? So that's a really horrible feeling when you're sitting there and that paper's right there and you know the answer, right? But it just won't come because you put yourself under a lot of stress. Athletes often do this, right? They'll have worked and worked and worked at their training, everything is going perfect, they get into the competition and they choke. And the performance is horrible, right? Because they put themselves under so much pressure for the result of that performance. So there's a lot of research on college-age students and their response to stress at different levels. So when you do your self-assessment for this chapter, if you have done it already, you'll recognize this. If not, then you'll see that the self-assessment number 1 is a specific assessment for freshmen. So if you're not a freshman, you're going to have to think back to when you were a freshman. What are the changes, right? It's a big change from living at home to coming to college and being on your own, possibly for the first time, right? And being responsible, totally responsible for yourself for the first time, right? And so they're interested in looking at how do different individuals manage that situation, right? Do some individuals find it exciting, but some individuals find it completely overwhelming, right? And if we can understand that a little bit better, then we can help those individuals that are finding it overwhelming, right? So if we think about that inverted U, it's not that stress causes the illness, it's an indirect pathway, right? The stress impacts your immune system, and because your immune system is not functioning properly, then, and your brain may not be functioning properly, then that puts you at more risk for health problems. Right? So we talked about this a little bit already. Personality, right? So my personality traits and my experiences contribute to my stress response, right? So if you are an individual who holds very high expectations for yourself, right, then you can often experience more stress because you don't reach a particular level of performance that you expected yourself to reach, right? My counselor would always catch me in session because I use the word should, I should, and she'd go shoulda, woulda, coulda, shoulda, woulda, coulda. Should is like the bane of counselling. That's the big no-no word, should. I should have done. And then the question is always why? Why do you feel you should have? Right? Who put that expectation on you? So that personality type and combined with your experiences can cause a different stress response for one person than another person. Does that make sense? So it's really this individual response, right? I'm real lucky that my partner is very laid back because I'm like mega hyper, so it's really good that he's very laid back. He can calm me down if I'm getting anxious about something that really I should not be getting anxious over. And I can recognize in my brain now that this is something trivial, right? Why am I having this response? That's the big question, right? So it's learning to identify what's triggering your response sometimes, right? Do difficult situations challenge you or overwhelm you, right? This is a big, as I said, you can't, it's difficult for someone outside, they don't know what you're going through, right? And sometimes we can't verbalize that very well. And then which behaviors do we choose to manage our stress, right? Do we do something healthy and we go and exercise, or do we do something less healthy, pour a glass of wine, right? So I tend to pour a glass of wine. All right, so my unique combination contributes to my response. And that's really the key point that I wanted to get over to you guys today, is that it's so individual that you've got to learn to be empathetic to other people if you can. You know, try not to judge someone else's response to something by how you feel about it. All right? So chronic health problems that can be exacerbated when you're under stress, irritable bowel syndrome gets often when you're stressed. If you have IBS, you'll have a flare-up and have real problems with your stomach and your guts. And different people's IBS responds in different ways. Some people get constipated, some people get diarrhea, some people get really bad stomach cramps, right? So you can't even, IBS is an umbrella term really, and there are several different forms of IBS that fall under that umbrella. Headaches, tension headaches, ulcers. So if you develop ulcers in your stomach, that's often due to chronic stress, right? Not acute stress. Okay? This ongoing, permanent situation of stress is the thing that's the problem. Can we break that cycle? All right? Overweight and obesity. So often people will change their eating habits when they feel stressed. So that's always an interesting one, I think. Some people stop eating when they feel stressed and they lose a lot of weight. Other people reach for the candy or the chips or the ice cream when they're stressed, and they put on weight when they're stressed. So again, it's a very, there's not like a common road here. It's very individual. And then there's clear links between stress and several types of heart disease and different cancers, because those chronic stress hormones in the bloodstream cause inflammation. You also see a real, some weird stuff going on with your blood sugar levels and your insulin, and so that can also cause inflammation as well. And it does damage to the insides of the blood vessels, and then that can lead to plaque and hardening of the arteries and lead to heart disease. So we want to try to manage our stress. What ways can we come up with that work for us as an individual, right? Not what works for someone else. What works for me to relieve or at least help me manage my stress. Okay. So what are some of the techniques that you guys use when you're feeling a little bit stressed?
I kind of
Exercise, workout.
Exercise, yeah. I like to go out and be outside, preferably go for a walk, but even if I can just go and sit and be outside. What kind of exercise do you like to do?
Like something intense, like, real fast paced.
Okay,
Something like dumbbells or bench press or squat.
okay. So something that you have to focus a lot on to get it right, so you can't think about the other stuff.
Right, and
Yeah.
music, that kind of helps me too.
Music, that's a good one. Yeah. So think about that over the next couple of days. I suspect that most of you have some level of stress right now because of the pandemic. So even the laid back ones probably have some kind of anxiety about when is this all going to be over, for heaven's sake, and just think about, what am I doing? What's my response? What's my coping mechanism, right? On Friday, we're going to look at a couple of different ways that the research says works well for coping with stress. And if you haven't done them before, that will be a fun activity day on Friday. You know, think about, do I reach for, my mum and my sister reach for a cigarette. My mum did reach for a cigarette, right? So you could always tell, because if she only smoked 5 cigarettes in a day, she wasn't very stressed. If we were up to 20 cigarettes in a day, then there was something going on, right? Pain can cause stress, you know? So if you've got an injury or there's something going on in your body that's causing, maybe not, you know, it's not bad enough to stop you functioning, but there's just this constant low-grade background pain going on all the time, right? That can cause stress as well. So, you know, my coping mechanisms are walking and yoga and alcohol. That's the truth of it, right? I've never smoked, I wouldn't smoke. So I'm lucky in that regard, I don't have to deal with that problem. But that's a way out for a lot of people, it is a cigarette. Right? So think about, or eating, right? So I don't buy biscuits. What do you call biscuits? Cookies. I don't buy cookies and have them in the house because that's bad news. If I'm having an anxious day, I'll just sit and eat a whole thing of cookies, so I just don't buy them and have them in the house and then I can't eat them. So just think, just over the next couple of days, try to catch yourself. You have to be able to recognize your behaviors if you want to change them. Maybe you don't want to change them, right? Maybe you feel that you have everything under control, but just think about it, okay? Anybody got questions? I've been wittering on for a long time. Questions or comments or?
Could you still be like high functioning but not have a whole lot of stress? And like kind of referring to the chart.
Yes, I think yes, because the chart is different, so that that inverted U, for example, doesn't lie on the same place on the x-axis for every person, right? So what one person finds as very low stress, for someone else is very high stress and puts them over the top. So yes, you can, there's very much this personality experience interaction. You can be very high functioning, you can be attentive, you can be engaged, and feel some stress or feel no stress to be in that position. You know, if you're not feeling stressed, that's great. On the other hand, right, you've got to think, so then what happens when I'm in danger? What do I recognize as danger? At what point am I stressed, right? I always think that's an interesting concept because I'm always looking around. I'm very careful being out in the dark at night, or I don't drive at night. And Brian will be, there's no problem. What are you concerned about? You know. But his stress response will kick in very quickly when it's necessary. We've been out in the wilderness a couple of times and things have happened. So it's interesting. Do you feel like you're very laid back?
Yeah.
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 What do you think it would take to really get you into a fight or flight scenario?
I think if someone I knew or cared about was in danger, I think that would really
That would
raise
do
the
it.
stress.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah, it's very interesting. It really is. And as someone who does not manage stress very well at all, I dreadfully envious of people who manage to just chill out, and it's like, I want to feel that. So on Friday, this week there'll be 2 activities, and one of them I will leave open for Friday and Saturday because it needs another person. So if you have read through the chapter well by now, then you'll know that there's a relaxation technique in the chapter, and I want you to try that, but that involves someone else talking to you and talking you through the relaxation technique. Do please let me know if you're in a situation because of the pandemic where you don't have anybody that could do that for you. And then the other one, we're going to do a little bit of yoga in class, and I'm going to teach you a sun salutation and some breathing techniques, and yeah, I think it will be fun. Okay? So be careful, don't go out on the roads if you can avoid it. If you do go out on the roads, keep your car in a low gear. Be very careful, there is lots of ice on the roads. And stay warm. And I'll see you on Friday.
See you on Friday. Thank you, Dr. Wall.
And you. Bye.